The ship coasted through the void of space, a sleek vessel that gleamed against the starry backdrop like a phantom. In the cockpit, Dr. Elena Rain sat motionless, her fingers drumming lightly against the console. Ahead of her, a distant world loomed, its surface scarred with the traces of ancient conflict and untouched by human hands. It was a place of mystery, an enigma that had called to her like an irresistible force. The kind of place only someone, like her, the driven, obsessive archaeologist, could understand. She had spent years of her life chasing the stories of the lost civilizations that once ruled the galaxy. But this was different. The Black Pyramid was unlike anything the human race had ever encountered. A structure so ancient, it predated human exploration by millennia, hidden beneath the sands of a desolate planet on the farthest edge of known space. Approaching the coordinates, the voice of her first officer, Lieutenant Juno, interrupted her thoughts. His tone was flat, professional, but Elena could hear the undercurrent of tension. She couldn't blame him. The Black Pyramid wasn't just an artifact. It was a puzzle, one whose pieces had eluded humanity for centuries, and now it lay just beyond their reach. She could feel the weight of it in the pit of her stomach, a pressure that was as exhilarating as it was terrifying. Elena's brother, Dr. Lucas Rain, had been part of the first expedition to this cursed place. He had disappeared without a trace, leaving only fragments of research and cryptic notes behind. Everyone assumed he was lost forever, swallowed by the pyramid's mystery. Yet, for Eleanor, the shadow of his disappearance had only grown more pronounced. As the years passed, she was here, not just to uncover the pyramid's secrets, but to understand what had happened to him, to reclaim what had been lost. As the ship descended through the planet's atmosphere, Elena glanced out the window at the barren landscape below. The pyramid, from what little could be seen through the shifting sandstorms, was immense. Its edges, jagged and unnatural, as though the land itself recoiled in fear of its existence. "Stay sharp," Elena commanded. "We don't know what we're walking into. Let's stick to the plan." The Black Pyramid had already claimed one victim, Lucas Rain, and the crew of this new expedition would not make the same mistake. They had their orders, and their task was clear: gain access to the pyramid's interior and discover its secrets. But deep down, Elena knew that the pyramid was more than just a structure. It was a force that could change everything. The pyramid's entrance, hidden beneath an avalanche of ancient rock and dust, was almost unrecognizable from the outside. The crew worked tirelessly to clear the entrance, their hands and tools scraping against surfaces that seemed to resist all effort, as though the pyramid itself was reluctant to reveal its innermost secrets. Elena stood apart, watching, her mind working a mile a minute. "This is it," Elena whispered, her breath steady despite the palpable weight of anticipation. She moved forward, instinctively taking the lead. She'd studied the holographic maps of the pyramid, but standing here in the flesh, in the presence of something this ancient and unknowable, there was no chart or diagram that could prepare her for the intensity of it. The massive stone door finally groaned open, revealing the hollow expanse within. The air inside was thick with the scent of old dust and something far less definable. As they ventured deeper, the walls began to pulse with a faint blue light. "Is it alive?" one of the crew members muttered, his voice full of awe and fear. Elena didn't respond. She didn't know if the pyramid was alive, but it sure as hell felt like it. She motioned for the crew to move forward. As they advanced, the walls began to display a strange, shifting array of symbols, alien in origin, ancient in meaning. Some seemed to glow with an eerie intensity, while others flickered as though they were being rewritten by invisible hands. Elena's heart quickened. This was it, the key to unlocking everything. But then, as they moved deeper, the lights flickered. A hum, low and primal, began to reverberate through the stone beneath their feet. It felt like the pyramid itself was waking up. "I don't like this," one of the crew members said, his voice sharp with anxiety. "Let's turn back." But Elena, driven by something far more visceral than fear, pressed on. She was closer to the truth than ever before. As they reached the center of the pyramid, the pulse of energy intensified. At the heart of the structure, nestled in the center of an ancient chamber, was a crystalline device. Translucent, shifting with light like a star trapped in a prison of stone. "It's beautiful," whispered Elena, her eyes fixed on the object. It was no ordinary artifact. This was something beyond human comprehension, a piece of technology that seemed to transcend time, space, and understanding. "I'll activate it," Elena said softly, almost to herself. "No!" Lieutenant Juno objected. "We don't know what it—" But before he could finish, Elena's hand was already reaching out to touch the crystal. The moment her skin made contact, the room shook. A blinding light erupted from the crystal, searing into her vision, filling her mind with a flood of alien knowledge, strange and incomprehensible. Her body jerked as though something was pulling her apart and reassembling her at the molecular level. Pain, intense pain, followed by an overwhelming sensation of understanding. Her mind expanded, her senses shattered and reformed. She could feel the ancient pyramid's heartbeat, its purpose, and something else, something she hadn't expected, a whisper, soft and distant, that she recognized as the voice of her brother, Lucas. "Elena, Elena, you have to stop this before it's too late." But it was already too late. The pyramid had chosen her. The transformation had begun. As the light faded and the shaking stopped, Elena stood there, trembling but unbroken. Her crew members stared at her in disbelief. The crystal had gone silent, but Elena felt the weight of its power coursing through her veins. The truth had been revealed, but at what cost? And in that moment, as the pyramid's energy continued to hum in the background, she understood the message that had been written on the walls, the cryptic words she had studied for so long. A human will walk out different. Elena was no longer the person she had been, but she would be damned if she allowed the pyramid to take everything from her too. The journey had only just begun. Elena stood still, the vibrations from the pyramid's core still humming through her, reverberating in her very bones. The crew watched her, uncertain, mouths agape as the aftermath of the encounter played out in stunned silence. Her hand, still resting lightly on the crystalline artifact, trembled. The light that had once seared her mind had now receded, but something else lingered, an undeniable sense of presence, as though the pyramid itself was waiting. "What did you do?" Juno's voice broke through the quiet, edged with panic. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He had seen the light that had engulfed her, felt the tremors that had rattled them all to their very core. He looked at her like she was someone or something else now. But Elena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes, trying to ground herself. She could feel it. Something had changed. Her thoughts were sharper, clearer, more profound. The overwhelming flood of alien knowledge had settled into her mind, weaving itself into the very fabric of her consciousness. She knew things she had no right to know. She understood things. A cold chill ran down her spine. But there was no time for reflection. Her senses, heightened to a terrifying degree, picked up the subtle shifts in the room, the breathing of her crew members, the echo of distant footsteps, the faint creaking of the pyramid's ancient walls. Something was happening. The pyramid was not done with them. "Elena," Juno's voice again, more urgent this time. He reached out, grabbing her shoulder. "We need to get out of here. This is madness. What if the pyramid is alive? What if it's—" Before he could finish, the walls shuddered once more, the hum returning. It was louder now, almost deafening, as if the pyramid was responding to her, recognizing her presence. The room seemed to shift, the symbols on the walls flashing with a strange rhythm, pulsing like a heartbeat. "Listen to me," Elena's voice. You cut through the growing tension. It was calm, too calm considering what had just happened. "I don't know what's happening, but I know the pyramid isn't what we thought it was." She paused, taking a deep breath. "It's connected to me now. It has chosen me." A ripple of fear passed through the crew. Lieutenant Juno stepped back, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. The others exchanged nervous glances, but no one dared to move. Elena took a step forward, her mind still reeling from the alien knowledge surging within her. Every thought was now tinged with the echo of distant voices, the weight of centuries pressing on her consciousness. She could feel the pyramid's will, its purpose, its origin, its intent. It was more than just a structure, it was something alive, something sentient. And it had noticed her, but there was no time to decipher it all. As if responding to her thoughts, a deep rumble echoed through the pyramid. The ground beneath them trembled. The air itself seemed to tighten, the temperature dropping abruptly. The crew gasped, stepping back instinctively. "Not again," Juno muttered under his breath. "This can't be good." Before anyone could react, a section of the wall to their left slid open with a harsh mechanical groan, revealing a hidden passageway. The air in the corridor felt different, heavier, more oppressive. A faint light emanated from deep within, casting strange shadows that seemed to dance and writhe like living things. It beckoned them. "Do we follow it?" Elena asked, her voice steady but filled with a new, unshakable confidence. She knew they had no choice. The pyramid had opened itself to them, specifically to her, and there was a path now laid out, one that led deeper into its heart. Juno stared at the passageway with growing trepidation, but he had been trained to follow orders. This was her expedition, after all. "Elena, I think we should—" But Elena, driven by something far beyond simple curiosity, was already stepping forward, her movements fluid, almost predatory. She turned back to look at him, her eyes burning with an intensity that made his stomach churn. "I have to know what's inside. You can stay behind if you want." Her words stung. He could see the change in her, a transformation that went far beyond the physical. There was something else about her now, something alien. But as she stepped toward the corridor, her pace, unyielding, he knew that if they didn't follow her now, they might never get another chance. Reluctantly, Juno signaled to the others. "Move out. We're not leaving her alone." The passage was narrow, the walls lined with ancient carvings and alien inscriptions, each more intricate than the last. Elena led the way, her every step sure, as though the very stones beneath her feet were guiding her forward. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air grew thick with a strange metallic scent, and the hum from the pyramid's core grew louder, vibrating through the floor and into their bones. Suddenly, they came to a halt. The passage opened into a vast chamber, one so large it seemed to swallow the light from their flashlights. At the center of the room, suspended in mid-air, was another artifact, one far larger and far more complex than the crystal Elena had activated earlier. It was a massive, pulsing sphere, covered in shifting, intricate symbols. Elena's eyes locked onto it. There was no mistaking it. This was the heart of the pyramid, the source of its power. "I can feel it," Elena murmured, almost to herself. "It's calling to me." The others, now visibly unsettled, gathered around her, staring at the sphere with unease. "Are you sure this is safe?" Juno asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena didn't answer. She was too absorbed in the object before her, in the overwhelming sensation of connection she felt, now that she was in the pyramid's deepest heart. There was no fear anymore, only certainty. Her hand reached toward the sphere, but as her fingers brushed against its surface, something shifted. The air crackled, and the sphere emitted a low, resonating hum. The room seemed to come alive. The symbols on the walls shifted. The air itself seemed to distort, as if reality was warping around. Then, Elena staggered back, her mind struggling to keep pace with the overwhelming flood of alien knowledge. The whisper returned, this time louder, more insistent. Elena. The transformation had begun. She could feel herself changing again, the process more intense than before. She was no longer just a human. She was becoming something else, something the pyramid had chosen for its own purpose. The question now was whether she could retain her humanity in the face of such power, and if not, what would she become? The chamber felt suffocating, the air thick with a presence that was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Eleanor's fingers hovered above the surface of the pulsing sphere, a soft hum reverberating through her body. Her crew stood in the shadows, a silent witness to the transformation unfolding before them. They had all felt it, the change in Elena, a shift so profound it seemed to reach deep into the core of their very souls. But none of them fully understood what it meant. Elena herself could barely comprehend it. Her heart raced in her chest. Not from fear, but from the raw, unfiltered knowledge surging through her mind. The symbols on the walls began to glow, their meaning unlocking in her mind with terrifying clarity. They were maps, codes, ancient blueprints to a power far beyond human understanding. It was as though the pyramid had been designed specifically for her, created to mold her into something greater, something beyond her wildest imagination. But at what cost? The whispers in her mind had grown louder, no longer distant echoes, but voices, alien, ancient, and relentless. They called to her, urging her to step forward, to claim the power that was now within her grasp. "Elena, stop!" Juno's voice sliced through the fog in her mind, pulling her back to reality. His words were filled with desperation, but they did nothing to quell the fire burning inside her. He was scared. She could see it in his eyes, but the fear he felt was not the same as the overwhelming need that surged through her. "Get out of my way," Elena replied, her voice flat, cold. She hadn't meant for the words to sound that way, but they escaped her lips, with an authority she hadn't intended. It was as if the pyramid itself had taken root in her soul, speaking through her. Juno hesitated, his hand twitching toward his weapon. "This isn't you, Elena. You're not thinking clearly. Whatever's inside this thing, it's controlling you." But Elena wasn't listening. She could feel the power now, wrapping itself around her, entwining with her very essence. She was no longer just a human. She was something more. And in that moment she understood. This wasn't just a discovery. It was an awakening. The pyramid had chosen her as its vessel, its conduit. The others were nothing but a distraction now. "Elena," Juno's voice softened, a tremor running through it. He took a cautious step forward, his hand outstretched. "Please, come back to us. Don't let this thing—" His words were lost in the hum of the sphere. Elena's eyes flicked to the rest of the crew. They were all standing back, fear and uncertainty clouding their faces. But there was something else there too, something that made her stomach turn. They weren't just scared of the pyramid, they were scared of her. She could feel it, the shift in their perception. They no longer saw her as a leader, a comrade. They saw her as something dangerous. "You don't understand," Elena said softly, her gaze locking with Juno's. The words felt foreign in her mouth. "This is bigger than all of us. I can feel the future in this place. I can see the galaxies unfold, the answers to every question we've ever had." "But at what price?" Juno snapped, his voice rising with panic. "What's happening to you, Elena? You're becoming—" She turned away, her eyes no longer focusing on the crew, but on the glowing symbols that surrounded them. A voice inside her whispered again, urging her to move forward. And she did. Without another word, Elena pressed her palm firmly against the sphere. For a moment, there was nothing but a blinding flash of light. When Elena opened her eyes again, she was no longer standing in the chamber. She wasn't even sure she was still in the pyramid at all. The world around her had shifted. The ground beneath her was no longer solid. It was liquid, a shimmering fluid mass that pulsed with light. Above her, the sky was a swirling kaleidoscope of stars and nebulae. It was as if she had been transported into the very fabric of space itself. But it wasn't just the environment that had changed. She could feel her body, no longer human, no longer bound by flesh. Her senses were heightened to an impossible degree. Every particle of the universe felt connected to her, her mind. Expanding, reaching out across the vastness of space. The pyramid had unlocked something within her, a power she could never have imagined, one that came with a terrible price. And yet, it was intoxicating. The knowledge, the power. It felt like a drug she couldn't resist. It was a drug, feeding off her need to understand, to control. She could feel her humanity slipping away, replaced by something far greater, far colder. "Elena," a voice called from behind her. It was Juno's voice, but it didn't sound like him. It sounded distant, detached, a ripple in the fabric of reality. She turned, and there he was, standing in the same strange, distorted space. He was shaking, his eyes wide with terror. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice a fragile thread in the cosmic void. "I've unlocked the truth," Elena replied, her voice reverberating through the very fabric of space. It was as if she was speaking through 1,000 different voices at once. "And now I know. There's more out there than we can ever understand, but I can change that. I can control it." Juno took a step back, his face pale. "You're not Elena anymore. You're something else. Something we can't stop. What have you become?" Elena's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Something more than human," she said. "I've seen what we can be, what all of us can be. We're not bound by the limits of flesh and bone. I can take us beyond the stars. I can bring about a new era." The crew had gathered around them now, their faces filled with uncertainty. They didn't understand what was happening to her, and they were afraid. "You can't control this," Juno said, his voice desperate. "You can't control everything." "Watch me," Elena whispered, and as she spoke, the world around them twisted again. The fabric of space bent and stretched, collapsing inward toward Elena like a gravitational pull, threatening to consume everything in its path. The pyramid had given Elena its power, but it had come with a cost she was only beginning to understand. The more she delved into the mysteries of the pyramid, the more she realized the truth behind it. The power it offered was limitless, but it wasn't just power. It was corruption, and in accepting it, she had crossed a line from which there might be no return. But Elena was beyond turning back now. She had touched the unknown, and the unknown had touched her. And now she was going to make it hers. The universe had never felt so vast, so infinite, and yet Elena felt utterly alone. The sensation of floating in the cosmic expanse had long since faded into a distant memory. Now, her awareness stretched, far beyond the pyramid, beyond the crew that still clung to their fragile humanity. The power, the knowledge, had consumed her, and she no longer saw the world through their eyes. To her, they were tiny, insignificant specks in the grand tapestry she could now perceive. But Elena wasn't blind. She could feel the divide growing, felt the weight of her crew's betrayal, their silent distrust. Juno's words echoed in her mind. "You can't control everything." And yet she had. She had taken the universe in her hands, manipulated it, bent it to her will. She was no longer just Elena. She was a force unto herself, a being untethered from the constraints of mere mortals. But the question loomed, haunting her like a shadow in the corner of her mind. What was the cost? Elena. Juno's voice broke through, the silent abyss echoing from what seemed like a great distance. His face appeared distorted, floating in her mind like a mirage. We can't let you do this. You're not the woman we once knew. This power, it's not yours to command. Eleanor's hand, now more alien than human, moved involuntarily, her fingers twitching as though something inside her was responding. To the sound of his voice, she glanced down at her palm. It was no longer skin, no longer flesh. It was something else, hard, crystalline, and shimmering with an otherworldly light. Juno, Elena whispered, her voice barely audible over the deafening silence that enveloped her. I've seen the future, our future. We have a chance to transcend, to evolve. The answers to every question. It's all right here. She gestured to the endless expanse around her, the swirling nebulae and constellations that had once been mere dots of light, now alive with meaning. Don't you see? We can end the wars, cure the diseases. I can lead us to a future beyond our understanding. Juno's face twisted in a mixture of pity and fear. And what will you become, Elena? A god? A tyrant? This is madness. You can't reshape the universe to your will without paying the price. The words hit her like a physical blow, but Eleanor merely stared at him, her gaze cold and distant. She wanted to scream, to tell him he was wrong, but something inside her resisted. Deep down, she knew Juno was right. She could feel the creeping tendrils of corruption taking root in her soul, the subtle whispers urging her to push further, to claim more. But she had already come too far. Juno, you have to trust me, she said, her voice now unwavering. I'm doing this for all of us. The words hung in the air, hollow. They were no longer the words of a leader, no longer the voice of the woman they had once trusted. They were the words of something else, something cold, something unyielding. The crew, though standing in silence, could feel the shift in the very air around them, the pressure building with every word Elena spoke. And yet, in their silence, there was a shared understanding, something that had been growing for a long time. They were losing her. Juno's fist clenched at his side. I can't let you do this. Elena felt a flicker in her chest, a sudden sharp pang of emotion. Was this love? She couldn't even tell anymore. The connection she had with her crew, with Juno, seemed distant, unreachable. They were all beneath her now, and yet a part of her, an almost unrecognizable part, longed for their understanding, their trust. Then stop me, she said quietly. Without warning, Juno lunged toward her, his hands outstretched, ready to fight. But Eleanor was faster. In one smooth motion, her crystalline arm shot out, the force of it sending Juno flying backward. The crew gasped, horrified, as he slammed against the wall of the chamber, crumpling to the floor in a heap. Juno! Rhea, one of the crew members, rushed to his side, her face pale with fear. But Juno merely waved her off, struggling to stand. His eyes locked on Eleanor's. You're not invincible, Eleanor, Juno said, his voice hoarse but defiant. You can't control everything. This power, it's changing you, it's ruining you. Elena's gaze softened for the briefest moment, a flicker of the woman she used to be, showing through the cold facade she had built. She almost reached out to him, almost apologized for the destruction she had wrought, but then the whispers returned, louder than ever, urging her to take control, to seize her destiny. No, she murmured, her voice distant. This is my choice. This is the future I want. She turned away from Juno, her focus shifting to the heart of the pyramid, its core, where the true power lay. Her fingers twitched again, and with a thought, the pyramid responded, shifting, rearranging itself like a living organism. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, the energy building to a crescendo. Elena could feel it, all of it. every piece of information, every atom in the universe vibrating with life. And then it stopped. A pulse of energy shot through the chamber, shaking the very foundation of the pyramid. The crew staggered, thrown off balance by the sudden shockwave. The air crackled with static, the power that had been so carefully controlled now spiraling out of control. Elena's heart raced, the pulse of the pyramid matching the rapid beat in her chest. Her vision blurred as the power surged through her, and for the first time she understood. It was too much. Juno's words echoed in her mind, drowning out the whispers of the pyramid. "You can't control everything." In that moment, Elena knew the truth. She had tried to control the uncontrollable, to shape the future with the hands of a god. But the pyramid, the power, had its own will. And now it was pushing back. The core of the pyramid exploded with a deafening roar, and Elena felt herself being consumed by the energy. She fought to maintain control, to hold on to her newfound power, but it was slipping through her fingers like sand. The very force she had sought to master was now tearing her apart from the inside out. The crew could only watch in horror as Elena's body convulsed, her form flickering in and out of existence, torn between the power she had claimed and the humanity she had lost. The pyramid was collapsing, its energies too unstable to contain. Juno, his eyes filled with sorrow, moved toward her. He had lost her once, and now it seemed he was losing her again, this time to the very power that had promised salvation. The explosion of light engulfed Elena, and then, as quickly as it had come, it was gone. All that remained was a stillness that felt like death. In the aftermath, the crew stood in stunned silence, their faces haunted by the events that had unfolded. Elena was gone, consumed by the very power she had sought to control. The pyramid, now nothing more than a smouldering husk, lay in ruins around them, and yet, deep in the silence of space, the whispers remained. Elena's voice, soft and distant, still echoed in their minds, a warning and a promise, a reminder that some powers were never meant to be wielded by mere mortals, and the price of defying that truth had been more than any of them could have imagined. The cold emptiness of space stretched out before them, a vast, unfeeling void that seemed to mock the fragile existence of those who dared to challenge it. The pyramid, once a monument to impossible power, lay in ruins, its fragmented pieces scattered like the shattered remnants of a broken dream. There was no glory in its destruction, no triumphant silence, only the hollow ache of loss. Juno stood at the heart of the chamber, the weight of what had transpired pressing down on his shoulders. The echoes of Elena's voice still haunted him, reverberating in his mind like the last remnants of a broken symphony. For a moment, he let himself feel the emptiness, the cold finality of the outcome. She was gone, and though he had fought to save her, he couldn't escape the truth. The power she had sought had consumed her, just as it had threatened to consume them all. Behind him, the crew began to stir, their faces grim, haunted by the events that had unfolded. Rhea, the first to move, slowly approached Juno, her steps heavy, her eyes distant. She didn't speak at first. No words seemed capable of capturing the weight of their loss. They had all known Elena, trusted her, followed her, and yet, in the end, she had turned against them, driven by a power that was never meant to be wielded. "I thought we could save her," Rhea murmured, her voice thick with regret. Juno looked at her, his expression unreadable. "So did I." A silence fell between them, the crew's collective grief weighing on the air. They had lost more than a leader. They had lost a friend, a comrade, someone who had once embodied the very best of humanity. But now, in the wake of her destruction, there was nothing left but the emptiness of space and the looming question, what came next? Juno exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting toward the horizon, where the remnants of the pyramid now lay in silent ruin. "I don't know," he said quietly. "But we can't stay here. We have to move forward. For Elena. For ourselves." Rhea nodded, but her eyes lingered on the wreckage, as though searching for some trace of Elena's presence amidst the debris. But how? How do we move on from this? Juno didn't have an answer, not one that would make sense. The truth was, none of them knew what came next. They were stranded in the depths of the cosmos, the remnants of a grand journey now reduced to a shattered dream. But in that silence, in the absence of certainty, there was a glimmer of something. A small spark of resilience that refused to be snuffed out by the tragedy they had endured. For in the end, it wasn't the power they wielded that defined them. It was how they chose to carry on when that power destroyed everything they had built. Days passed, though time felt warped, as though the fabric of the universe itself had been altered by Elena's final act. The crew gathered in the ship's common area, the hum of the engines a constant grounding. Presence amidst the chaos of their emotions. There were no grand speeches, no promises of redemption, just the quiet, shared understanding that they had been irrevocably changed, and that change, for better or worse, was theirs to carry. Juno stood at the window, staring out into the endless black, his reflection barely visible in the glass. His thoughts were a tangled mess, but there was one certainty. They had learned a harsh lesson. Elena's ambition, her hunger for power, had ultimately been her undoing. It wasn't the pyramid that had destroyed her, it was the belief that they could control it, that they could bend the universe to their will. The crew had been witness to a tragic truth. Even the greatest of humanity could fall, not because they lacked the will to survive, but because they lost sight of the very thing that had made them human in the first place, their vulnerability, their need for connection, their understanding that not everything could be mastered. In a quiet corner of the ship, Rhea sat alone, looking at the old photos they had taken before the journey had started. She ran her fingers over the faces of the people they had been, before they had become lost in the pursuit of something greater than themselves. The photographs were relics now, like fragments of a past that had slipped away forever. But as she stared at the images, something stirred inside her, a flicker of hope. "We're not done yet," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Juno turned from the window, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "No, we're not." The crew may have been broken, fractured by their experiences and the loss of their leader, but they were still alive. They still had the chance to rebuild, to chart a new course through the stars. It wasn't the path they had expected to walk, but it was theirs to choose. Juno stepped forward, his eyes scanning the faces of his crew. Each one carried the weight of their decisions, the burden of Elena's legacy, but they also carried something more, their humanity. In the end, it was that which had saved them, and it was that which would carry them forward. "We have to go." "Back," Juno said, his voice steady, though the gravity of his words hung heavy in the air. "We have to finish what we started, not for Elena, not for the power, but for the people we were before all of this. We owe them that." Rhea stood, her expression resolute. "Then let's do it. Together." And so the crew set their course, not toward the unknown power that had once driven them, but toward the future, toward the vast expanse of space that awaited their exploration. The journey ahead would not be easy. They had been irrevocably changed, scarred by the events that had unfolded. But they had survived, and survival in the cold expanse of space was a victory in itself. Elena's name would linger in their minds, a reminder of the fine line between ambition and destruction, between the desire to shape the future and the responsibility of bearing its consequences. Her legacy, twisted and tragic, would forever echo through their hearts, a silent testament to the cost of trying to control what should never have been theirs to hold. But for now, they would carry on, humanity's unwavering resilience shining, brighter than the stars around them. The stars, once distant, now felt closer than ever, not because the crew had overcome their fears or challenges, but because they had finally learned what it meant to truly reach for them. And in that realization, they found their strength. The journey had not ended. It had only just begun. Space, infinite and unyielding, stretched endlessly beyond the ship's hull. The crew had taken their first tentative steps toward recovery, but the void beyond remained as vast and unknowable as ever. In the wake of their journey, their survival, and the ghosts of what they had lost, there was no triumphant return to the stars. No cheers, no applause. Just the steady hum of the ship's engines, the quiet rhythm of life carrying on despite all that had transpired. Juno sat alone in the observation deck, the stars flickering softly against the backdrop of the universe. They had made their choice to keep moving forward, not in pursuit of some impossible power, but toward the unknown that had once inspired them. They had given up on conquering the universe. Now they sought to understand it, to explore, to learn. But the path forward was no longer clear. Elena's legacy, while tragic, had left them with more than just scars. It had given them a deeper understanding of themselves, of their limitations, and their potential. They could no longer afford to be blinded by ambition. The pyramid had shown them that, had shown them the price of unchecked power, but it had also revealed something else: the resilience of humanity, the incredible ability to adapt and evolve, to survive even in the face of the most unimaginable challenges. Juno's fingers traced the smooth surface of the glass in front of him, his mind far from the quiet emptiness outside. His thoughts wandered to the others: Rhea, Zach, Orin. Each of them had been changed by what they had experienced, but none more so than Elena. The woman who had once led them with such certainty now lay among the ruins, a symbol of both hope and warning. Rhea had been the first to truly speak of moving on. It was a quiet sentiment, one that lingered in the air between them, unspoken but understood. They would continue their journey, not as conquerors, but as humble explorers. There were still so many unknowns, alien civilizations to encounter, worlds to discover, mysteries to unlock. But this time they would proceed with a different mindset. They would not seek domination, they would seek understanding. The crew was rebuilding slowly, but with purpose. Zach, the engineer, had begun to focus on retrofitting the ship, preparing for long-term travel. His hands, once so adept at manipulating machinery, now moved with a careful grace, as though he too had learned that control, true control, was about restraint. Orin had become quieter, the gravity of their shared trauma weighing heavily on him, but there was a calm strength in his silence. Rhea, ever the optimistic force, had taken it upon herself to help them regain their sense of unity. And though Juno led them, it was clear that they were all finding their way together. But no matter how far they traveled, or how much time passed, Elena would never be far from their thoughts. She had been their shining star, their leader and their downfall. Her memory would shape their choices, their motivations, their desire for survival, but they would not let it define them. They were not the sum of their failures. They were the promise of something more. As the stars glittered in the vast expanse of space, Juno felt the weight of it all, the enormity of the journey that lay ahead. They were not the first to traverse the stars, and they would not be the last. But they were human, and that, Juno realized, was the most powerful thing they could ever be. Their strength did not come from technology, from the artifacts they'd uncovered, or the power they sought. It came from their ability to question, to learn, to adapt, and above all, to remain resilient in the face of the impossible. They were on the brink of a new chapter, one of discovery, but also of self-exploration. What would they find out there, in the endless dark? How far could humanity truly go? What would they learn about themselves in the process? And most pressing of all, what price were they willing to pay to uncover those answers? Juno leaned back in the chair, staring into the infinite stretch of space. He did not have the answers. Not yet. But there was time. There was always time. Far off in the distance, the ship's sensors pinged with a faint signal, a strange anomaly moving within the vast emptiness. A ripple in the fabric of space that no one could explain. It was small, distant, insignificant, or so it seemed. But to those who had learned to read between the lines of the universe's grand design, it was something more, something important. Juno stood, his mind already shifting, calculations forming in the back of his mind. The crew would need to be briefed, the ship prepared, and the course plotted. A new path lay ahead. And for the first time in a long while, Juno felt the rush of possibility. He glanced at the darkened horizon beyond the glass, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. The unknown had never felt so enticing. The final shot lingered for a moment, a starship, small against the cosmic backdrop, its engines firing as it continued its journey into the black. A single spark of humanity, fighting to survive, to understand, to grow. And as the ship drifted into the void, a voice whispered, barely audible in the stillness of space, "We are not done yet." The story closed on a note of anticipation, the sense that though the immediate challenges had been met, the adventure was far from over. The crew had learned a painful lesson and emerged from the ruins stronger, with a renewed purpose. But in the depths of space, there were still mysteries to uncover, and not all of them would be kind. The questions they had yet to ask, the choices they would have to make, would shape the future they had yet to discover, and humanity, ever resilient, would keep moving forward, into the darkness, into the unknown, unchanged in its drive to reach for the stars.